Imagine standing on the salt-slicked deck of a merchant brigantine in the biting spring of 1785, watching a jagged silhouette of red brick, charred timber, and skeleton spires emerge from the Atlantic mist. This is New York City. It is not yet the gleaming empire city of steel and glass, nor is it the unquestioned financial citadel of the globe. Instead, it is a wounded, scarred survivor of a devastating revolution, a city smelling of wet ash, rotting fish, and the desperate sweat of reconstruction. The physical wounds of the Great Fire of 1776, which had devoured a quarter of the urban landscape, still gape open like unhealed gashes. Tent cities of canvas and salvaged would huddle against the ruins of grand colonial mansions. Yet, beneath the soot and the ruins, a terrifying and magnificent energy hums. This ruined island, at the edge of a vast, untamed continent, is preparing to do something unprecedented. It is not merely rebuilding its docks and taverns. It is preparing to invent a republic and forge the financial architecture of the modern world. The paradox of New York in the 1780s is profound. How does a bankrupt, war-torn city, filled with roaming livestock and fractured allegiances, orchestrate the birth of a global superpower? The decisions made in these muddy, chaotic streets, over a brief span of years, would lock the trajectory of the American experiment into place. Men of immense ambition, profound intellect, and ruthless pragmatism walked these unpaved avenues, their coats spattered with mud, their minds calculating the future of an entire hemisphere. They were playing a high-stakes game of statecraft and speculation, where the failure of a single bond issuance, or a misstep in political protocol, could plunge the fragile Union back into bloody anarchy. This is the untold, visceral story of the Crucible years. It is a narrative not of marble statues and inevitable triumphs, but of desperate gambles, secret coffeehouse betrayals, and the relentless, undeniable power of capital colliding with the lofty ideals of liberty. The world we inhabit today was forged, not on the battlefields, but in the smoky, rum-soaked rooms of a ruined city, desperate to survive. To understand the magnitude of this era, one must strip away the inevitability of American success. In the aftermath of the Treaty of Paris, the British military evacuated New York in 1783, taking with them the loyalist elite and the capital that had kept the local economy afloat. What they left behind was an economic vacuum and a physical wasteland. The new nation was drowning in war debt. Its currency was nearly worthless, and the Continental Congress was a toothless entity, wandering from city to city, unable to levy taxes or enforce laws. When the decision was made to seat the first federal government in New York City, it was an act of profound geopolitical faith. The city was geographically strategic, a nexus between the agrarian South and the mercantile North. But it was materially inadequate. The social fabric was a volatile tapestry of returning patriot exiles, resentful neutralists, ambitious foreign merchants, and enslaved African Americans who labored under the hypocritical shadow of newly proclaimed liberties. The environment was ripe for either spectacular failure or radical innovation. Necessity, born of absolute bankruptcy, became the mother of American capitalism and federalism. The city had to invent a system of credit and authority out of thin air, or the United States would fracture into squabbling, vulnerable fiefdoms, ripe for European reconquest. The men who navigated this labyrinth were driven by a complex psychology, blending Enlightenment idealism with bare-knuckled opportunism. At the center stood George Washington, a man acutely aware that every step he took, every bow he made, and every garment he wore would establish a precedent for centuries. His internal conflict was immense. He despised the trappings of monarchy, yet he understood that the new republic needed an aura of unassailable authority to command respect from European empires. His residence in New York, first at the Osgood House and later the Maycomb House, was a theater where the delicate balance between Republican simplicity and executive dignity was meticulously rehearsed. In the shadows of Washington's towering dignity operated men like Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burbrian, volatile and ruthlessly ambitious. Hamilton, a penniless immigrant who had married into New York aristocracy, possessed a strategic mindset that saw the future not in agrarian virtue, but in centralized banking, manufacturing, and trade. His motivation was order and national power. He understood that a nation bound by shared debt is a nation that will not dissolve. On the opposing flank were the merchants and speculators, men who viewed the new government not as a sacred temple, but as a mechanism for immense personal enrichment. They were the pragmatists who realized that patriotism and profit could be seamlessly, and sometimes dangerously, intertwined. The tension in New York built gradually, manifesting in the physical transformation of the city. The first major turning point was the architectural and symbolic resurrection of Wall Street. Federal Hall, originally a humble colonial structure, was lavishly remodeled by Pierre Charles L'Enfant to become the physical embodiment of the new Constitution. On April 30, 1789, the tension broke in a moment of unparalleled historic gravity. George Washington stepped onto the balcony of Federal Hall, overlooking a sea of faces on Wall and Broad streets, to take the oath of office. In that single, meticulously choreographed act, the abstract ideas of the Constitution were made flesh. The crowd did not know whether to cheer him as a president or revere him as a king. Yet, the true axis of American power was shifting just a few blocks away, driven not by politicians, but by market forces. The second, arguably more consequential turning point, occurred in 1792, under the shade of a buttonwood tree on Wall Street. The new federal government had issued millions in bonds to absorb state war debts. This unleashed a frenzy of uncontrolled speculation, leading to America's first financial panic. To prevent total collapse, 24 prominent brokers signed the Buttonwood Agreement, creating a closed club to trade securities with strict rules and commissions. This secret syndicate, which soon moved its operations into the bustling, chaotic Tontine Coffee House, was the clandestine birth of the New York Stock Exchange. Here, amidst the clinking of tankards and the haze of pipe smoke, the modern machinery of global finance was quietly assembled. The immediate consequences of this dual birth, political and financial, were chaotic and transformative. Politically, the establishment of the federal government in New York proved that the republic could function, pass laws including the Bill of Rights, and command a rudimentary national structure. Militarily, the consolidation of debt allowed the government to slowly build the credit necessary to fund a standing navy and secure its borders. Economically and socially, however, the impact was profoundly disruptive. A new aristocracy of wealth emerged overnight, parading in silk and imported velvet along the fashionable promenade of the Battery, deliberately distancing themselves from the laborers and sailors who populated the grimy wards. The juxtaposition was staggering. Elegant carriages navigated streets where feral pigs roamed freely, serving as the city's primary waste disposal system. Furthermore, the rapacious drive for capital led to breathtaking political subterfuge. As the city's population exploded, a severe water crisis brought recurring waves of yellow fever. In 1799, Aaron Burr championed a bill to create a private water company, the Manhattan Company, ostensibly to save the city from disease. But hidden deep within the legislation was a loosely worded clause, allowing the company to use its surplus capital for financial operations. Burr had weaponized a public health crisis to stealthily charter a massive bank institution that would eventually become J.P. Morgan Chase. This act perfectly encapsulated the era, brilliant, cynical, and ruthlessly effective. The era of New York as the political capital was brief. Political compromises soon sent the seat of government south to the fever-ridden swamps of the Potomac to appease southern agrarian interests. But New York had already secured a much greater prize. It had become the unquestioned capital of American capital. By establishing the mechanisms of banking, the stock exchange, and corporate law within a few intense years, the city hardwired itself into the DNA of the American century. This short, intense window reshaped the global balance of power. By proving that a republic could successfully manage national debt and foster liquid financial markets, New York demonstrated to European powers that the United States was not a transient experiment, but a permanent, formidable entity. The blueprint laid down in the 1780s and 90s, the marriage of state protection and aggressive free market capitalism, became the defining characteristic of American hegemony. The physical manifestation of this relentless forward momentum was later codified in the Commissioner's Plan of 1811, which imposed a rigid, mathematically precise grid system over the island, leveling hills and filling ponds to create a perfect engine for real estate and commerce. Looking beyond the immediate events, a structural analysis reveals a profound shift in civilizational values. The United States was ostensibly founded on the classical republican ideals of civic virtue, agrarian independence, and suspicion of centralized power, the vision of Thomas Jefferson. Yet, the reality of survival in a hostile world demanded the Hamiltonian machinery forged in New York: credit, industry, and interconnected markets. Historians continue to debate the true nature of this period. Was the founding of the financial system a betrayal of the revolution's democratic ideals? A quiet coup d'etat by the wealthy elite, Or was it the pragmatic salvation of a nation that would have otherwise perished in bankruptcy? Alternate historical interpretations suggest that without the aggressive financial consolidation orchestrated in the Tontine Coffee House, the American states would have balkanized, leading to centuries of European-style border wars on the North American continent. The profound irony of this era is that the founding fathers, who wrote extensively about the dangers of factions, monopolies, and centralized wealth, were forced by circumstance to build the very institutions that would spawn the greatest accumulation of private wealth in human history. The republic they designed to prevent tyranny inadvertently created the framework for corporate empires that would wield power rivaling nation-states. The story of New York in 1785 is the story of an infant nation confronting the brutal realities of survival. It teaches us that the highest political ideals are fragile illusions without the brutal, calculating machinery of economics to sustain them. Power, ultimately, did not reside in the parchment of the Constitution alone, but in the ledger books of Wall Street. The men who rebuilt New York from its ashes understood a cold, enduring truth. To change the world, one must first figure out how to finance it. The smoke of the Great Fire has long dissipated, but the engine of ambition they ignited in the ruins continues to drive and occasionally threaten the world today.